So, September 1st, 1939, German troops pour into Poland, and just like that, the Second World War begins. But a fire that big doesn't just start with a single spark. To really get what happened, we need to rewind the clock just about 20 years to the end of the First World War, because believe it or not, the seeds for the next one were already being planted. Right away, in the ashes of Germany's defeat, this really poisonous idea starts to spread. It was called the stab in the back myth. People started to believe and say things just like this, that their powerful army hadn't really lost on the battlefield. No, they were sabotaged from inside, betrayed by their own leaders. This lie created this deep, dangerous sense of national humiliation and a desperate thirst for revenge. So the peace that followed, well, it was built on that incredibly shaky ground. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't really seen as the end of a war. For a lot of people, especially in Germany, it felt more like the start of a 20-year countdown to the next one. And just look at the terms of this treaty. It was basically layer upon layer of punishment. First, Germany had to accept all the blame for the war. Then, they were hit with crippling reparation payments, £6.6 billion. And on top of that, their military was just gutted, stripped down to a tiny force with no air force, no tanks, no submarines. Every single one of these conditions felt like a deep national insult. But here's the real kicker. This was the treaty's hidden time bomb. When the victors redrew the map of Europe, millions of German-speaking people suddenly found themselves living as minorities in brand new countries, like Czechoslovakia and Poland. This created immediate instability, and it handed Adolf Hitler the perfect excuse he would later use to demand that land back. So you have all this resentment just simmering away. What happens when you throw gasoline on that fire? Well, that gasoline was an economic catastrophe. The shaky recovery of the 1920s came crashing down with the Great Depression, creating the absolute perfect storm for extremist politicians who are promising easy answers to really hard problems. And the connection between economic pain and political extremism, it's impossible to ignore. Just look at this. As unemployment in Germany skyrockets between 1928 and 1932, look what else goes up right alongside it: support for Hitler's Nazi Party. When people lost their jobs and their life savings, they also lost their faith in democracy. By 1932, the Nazis were the biggest party in the German parliament. Economic desperation had literally paved the way for a dictator. And once he had a foot in the door, Hitler moved with terrifying speed. In just 19 months, that's it. He went from being appointed chancellor to becoming the absolute Führer, the total leader. He used a fire at the parliament building as a pretext to grab emergency powers. He banned every other political party and just dismantled German democracy piece by piece. The democratic government Germany had after the war, it was dead. Okay. So while Germany is transforming on the inside, other ambitious expansionist countries are watching, and they see an opportunity. They start to test the system, pushing the boundaries of that post-war order just to see how far they could go before anyone pushed back. Two major acts of aggression really set a dangerous new standard. First, in 1931, Japan invades Manchuria in China. The League of Nations condemns it, so Japan just walks out. And the result? Absolutely nothing. Then, 4 years later, Mussolini's Italy invades Abyssinia, what we now call Ethiopia. This time they tried some weak economic sanctions, but they were a total failure. The lesson for any dictator watching was crystal clear. The international community was all Varg and no bite. Aggression worked. The next big test came in Spain. The Spanish Civil War was so much more than a local conflict. It was basically a brutal dress rehearsal for World War II, a proving ground for the armies, the new weapons, and the clashing ideologies that would soon engulf the entire planet. You see, Franco's nationalists got massive support from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. And they weren't just sending supplies, they were using the war as a laboratory, a place to test out their new tanks, their new tactics, and their new air force, the infamous Condor Legion that bombed civilians in Guernica. On the other side, the Republicans got some help from the Soviet Union and foreign volunteers, but Britain and France, they decided on a policy of non-intervention because they were terrified of starting a bigger war. And the outcome was decisive. When Franco won, it wasn't just a victory for fascism in Spain. It was a massive psychological win for Hitler and Mussolini. It proved what they already believed, that Britain and France just didn't have the stomach to fight. The path for them to take even more now seemed wide open. Feeling pretty confident now, Hitler starts to play this high-stakes game with Europe, making one aggressive demand after another. And the response from Britain and France was a policy we now call appeasement, basically giving the bully what he wants in the desperate hope that it'll make him stop. And boy, did the dominoes fall fast. In 1936, Hitler marches troops into the Rhineland, a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. The response? Crickets. 2 years later, he annexes Austria. Again, nothing. Then, he demands a huge chunk of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. And at Munich, Britain and France just give it to him. The problem was, each time they gave in, it didn't satisfy Hitler. It just made him hungry for the next move. This right here, this is the infamous quote from the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. He said this right after he got back from Munich, holding up the agreement he'd signed with Hitler. He genuinely believed he had secured peace in our time by sacrificing a piece of Czechoslovakia. Of course, just 6 months later, Hitler broke his promise and took the rest of the country anyway. Appeasement was a catastrophic failure. After Hitler swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia, the illusion was shattered. Everyone knew peace was a lie. Britain and France finally drew a line in the sand. They guaranteed they would defend Poland. But Hitler? Well, he had one last absolutely stunning card to play. This was the plot twist that nobody on Earth saw coming. The world just watched in shock as two mortal enemies, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, signed a non-aggression pact. Think about that, the fascists and the communists. But there was a secret part of the deal. They agreed to carve up Poland between them. For Hitler, this was the ultimate green light. He no longer had to fear a two-front war. The last major obstacle to invading Poland was gone. So when you put it all together, the flawed peace treaty, the economic desperation, the total failure of the world to stand up to aggressors, and the disastrous miscalculation of appeasement, it really all leads to this one chilling question. Was this all just a series of terrible but preventable mistakes? Or by 1939, was the world already on an unstoppable path to another global catastrophe?